I'm Tobias from Astralis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.
A prominent aspect of Reship's ownership of Astralis and the setup that they have between the players and that company has been them publicizing their support for the team, the infrastructure they've put in place to help this team thrive, be at their best, play at peak performance levels. So they have a sports psychologist. This was a very popular theme around the team's first successful major campaign when they won in January of 2017 at the E-League Major Atlanta. Obviously bringing in an exercise component, people being physically fit. This is something last year that a lot of emphasis was placed upon when outlining this stuff. Likewise, diet, having someone who actually advises you what to eat, how to fuel your body, how to maintain energy levels when you're at an event day, when you're trying to maximize your practice and preparation. Practice itself, having offices where you go and you play specifically from there, not just from your house at home or a team house environment like they've often had in North American esports, having a special space for an office that you travel to each day so that you work. It's set mentally in the framing that you're going there to do work. You can use this office space for boot camps, bring in other teams, you can practice against them. Even the kind of revolutionary aspect I've pointed out in the past, where apparently Zonic was sometimes in-game leading for Glaive while they were playing, not literally in the game, but as in he was like listening on comms and doing the shot calling, so that Glaive could just practice his spots individually, so that then Glaive would be the in-game leader for the real match, but he'd have gotten the same individual practice other players did, and hence the implication is that's why last year his numbers were much, much better, along with the natural inflation of playing with Astralis, as I basically pointed out in my article about Zipnix, and people kind of got the point of that one. Also then, within practice, there's the whole aspect where they're able to skip events and therefore have more time to practice and stay at home and watch demos and work on new things and innovate, as opposed to constantly being on the road, or when you're not on the road, having spent so much time away that you need a week off, that you need time to decompress. Now, one of the reasons I'm going to talk about this topic is, yes, we're going to talk about the positives and the good things that these things add, but actually one of the main driving forces behind wanting to make this video, because people are aware these things exist. Some of them existed in Korean esports. Obviously, they exist in traditional sports. I'd even say some of these are actually, despite the fact we're talking about them in 2018 and 2019, like revolutionary things, are actually things that someone like Fatality basically pioneered. We're talking like almost 20 years ago at this point in time, 17, 18 years ago, and he was already doing all the stuff at high level in a way that Astralis players are only just now doing and getting results and consistency out of it. So while I certainly acknowledge these all as things that they have value, that I think that they are things that if people are interested in as teams and as players, they should look into, perhaps consider, I think will generally add a positive to your team, will rarely be a negative or net negative. I will say one of the things that motivated me to make this video is Astralis themselves, and specifically the people within the org who were doing these things, who are the people in charge of their diet and the sports psychologists, the people setting up the practice environment. I think they have overhyped this aspect. Now, I get that there's a level on which you want to encourage your players to do it. You want to keep them on track, that this is something that's helping them. You want to congratulate them for doing the hard work and then having success. I get all of that, and it's certainly been part of the refresh branding with Astralis that we provide all this support so that other teams would want to be involved and that other people look at them as an industry leader, as a company. I get all of that. It certainly makes sense from a PR angle. But I also get a vibe from some of the interviews I've seen that some of these people genuinely think they're the champion. It's like when I've heard this guy, Lars Robel or Robbie or whatever he's called, who's the sports psychologist they have, he talks like he's the reason they're winning all these championships. Like he's the reason they never break down in a big final and that they've won all these championships that were so dominant last year. And the implication is unless someone else does what he's doing and at the level he's doing that, you'll always be behind Astralis. And that is a fucking whack angle. That is an angle I can't fuck with on any level whatsoever. I mean, listen, I get it. The idea of the sentiment that, Astralis work the hardest and the most disciplined, therefore they deserve to win. I can sort of go along with that. Like it's the old, talent, hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. So obviously if you have talent and you work hard, you should be the best. Yes, there is a logic to that. The problem is the idea that if this infrastructure is what is making them win is just nonsense. So let's address each point, shall we? Let's start sports psychologists. So remember, they've had the sports psychologists quite a long time now. They've had it since I think late 2016 with the lineup with Glaive and Kirby. So the problem is they already used the angle that helped the old team get over their hump, win more events, cruise crucially go on to win a major, where famously they'd never even be in the final of a major. Okay, I could even buy some of that. Like, I do think the team generally looked like they improved. Unfortunately, it was simultaneous to Glaive coming on board, so I personally would put the correlation stronger with bringing in Glaive, a great in-game leader, who'd now been in the wilderness long enough that when he finally earned a second chance, or was gifted one, he actually seized hold of it and made fucking use of it and didn't give any excuse. I think that's a bigger factor. But you know what? Yeah, generally the team seemed to develop a bit more in terms of bending but not breaking, where the older Astralis would break in those scenarios. But I think if you look at the team overall and all the players, it only helped to a certain degree, and it depended on the player. Like, I actually found generally Device seemed to have the same sorts of issues in big finals in 2017, late 2016, as you saw in the E-League Season 2 final, as you saw in the final of E-League Atlanta, for that matter. You know, this is a guy where his team was very good. He was a very good player, but he still had some issues there. The sports psychologist wasn't the panacea to fix all ills, as it were. Quite frankly, you've got to look at the fact that while they had the sports psychologist, well, after Katowice, they didn't win anything for a year, did they? They went from Katowice 2017 to DreamHack Marseille 2018, so well over a year, and they didn't win any titles at all. They were in position a number of times. There were a number of semi-finals. They were even in winning positions against teams. They had losing games where they collapsed. Remember the E-League Premier first map where they were winning like 12-3 or something, or 13-2 against FaZe, and FaZe came all the way back on CT side, won the map, and then 2-0'd them straight up in the final. So this is pretty disappointing stuff, actually. If the sports psychologist is supposed to be the one who got the credit for taking you over the hump, why they never get any of the blame or taking any responsibility when they can't get you over the hump, right? So that angle's already played out. Like, that was in place long before the 2018 line. Yes, different sports psychologist, but still you'd started to address that aspect, right? Now, there's also the fact that plenty of other teams have had a sports psychologist or have worked with them. I mean, probably the most damning indictment of this as a field, as if you think it's a band-aid fix, is Team Liquid. Team Liquid had access to a sports psychologist last year and were using him. And that's the team that famously couldn't get over the hump enough relative to their individual skill level and quality as a team, and who they'd not been able to beat elsewhere than finals. If they played a team in the semi-finals, they could beat them. They would lose that team if they played them in a final. They couldn't get over the hump against the one big team that they were facing. Most other top teams, FaZe, Clan, MIBR, even NIP, all these teams managed to get a best of 3 win over Astralis. Liquid never could, and Liquid was a better team than these other squads I'm talking about. So why couldn't they do it? They had the sports psychologist. What was holding them back, right? It's because whether this works or not is very dependent on both your team and the people who are in your team. Mainly as a team is just a unit of people, but team units obviously have their own identity and shared characteristics. So if as a team, you're a team who chokes or has difficulty under pressure, yes, you should probably work with a sports psychologist. As a player, even if you do, it might not be the thing that fixes it for you. As a team, it might help generally. Doesn't mean it'll help each player though. So already that part's really overhyped, even though I do think it's a resource that you should have available so people can at least try it and see if it works for them. Then there's the whole angle that if this worked beyond esports, like if this was really a thing that always worked, and if you got the best guy, he could definitely get you over the hump. All the greatest sports stars would have done it. Peyton Manning would have had it. Andy Murray would have had it. Would have had one. They would have had all these things, all these great players that have repeatedly gotten to the championship or deep or had expectations high and then let people down and disappoint. They all would have just got this guy, worked with him for a year or two, and then it would have been fixed, right? You think that LeBron James, etc., can't get hold of someone of the level that Astralis' guy's at? Of course not. He got a guy way better than that. He's probably got the best fucking guy in the world that charges like $10,000 an hour or something. And some of those guys still can't get you over the hump. So that's mad overrated anyway. Then the exercise and diet issue, it's basically the same thing. It's how you take care of the physical body, the vehicle that you're in the physical, tangible world. And therefore, as a result, hopefully, if that has a knock-on effect on the mind, healthy mind in a sound body or whatever the fuck that old thing is, yeah, to a degree, that seems like it should work. Again, it's something that I can't really see generally hurting you, depending on what type of person you are. But quite frankly, if you look at Counter-Strike and most esports games, I'd say at best there's a very, very loose correlation between being fit and being the best at your game. I mean, we've had many examples of players who, quite frankly, were better when they were fat. I mean, obvious ones would be like Cloud9 players, Hiko and Semphis. Those were at their absolute peak when they were fat. You've got players like Nico and Cold Zero, who in 2016 were overweight. 2017 had lost all the weight. Arguably pretty similar level. They were outrageously good in 2016. They were very, very good in 2017. More their team aspects that changed how their individual performance went, seemingly, than their actual weight or what health level they were in. Now, sure, I would say, just even as a good building block for life, Losing weight, being in shape is good because you're forming positive habits, you're breaking negative habits, you're building basic discipline, which can then be applied as a building block to every other aspect of your life. You're emphasizing longer term thinking that's smarter as opposed to shorter term, more like instant gratification. Dealing with the senses, which is what people want with the short term, eat the candy bar, have the Snickers, whatever, fuck around with a Coke, don't go and work out, just lie on the sofa. You're breaking people like that, that's good, but is it going to help you that much in the game? It's debatable, quite frankly. There's plenty of players that have been good who are thin and who are fat. It doesn't seem to affect anything. For me, the bigger issue in terms of diet, and I don't know how well Astralis actually deals with this, would be something along the lines of what you might see if you ever followed DDK's Instagram, where DDK will bring with him like superfoods and special like vitamins and stuff so that he can hopefully like keep away from illnesses while he's away, have things that give him energy but without being some sort of a direct energy drink that might help be packed full of caffeine and other things. He obviously wants to be able to have meal replacements sometimes, so he's eating similar foods. That's a bigger issue for me, is along with the fatality line of like, how do you peak at tournaments? How do you keep it consistent? There's the thing. I would want a dietitian who works with my team to find out what kinds of foods are available at nearly all events. Isolate those, figure out a diet from those that you eat when you're at home and then that you eat when you're at the event, and you're having similar foods with similar kind of energy releases, similar kinds of carbohydrates that you're taking into your system, or meat, and when you have it, how many hours before the game. Those are the things I think have more room to potentially add a tiny little percentage. In terms of the whole practice angle, right, for me, the best angle of the practice one is actually just the ability to skip events. I know I've obviously complained elsewhere that I think they're going too far with it and that they're going to ruin their legacy and make themselves not number one anymore, and it just sucks for the scene. But in terms of skipping the odd event, I think that's a good thing. I think the idea that you can do that generally will allow you a chance to practice more, give people more of a breather, let people be a bit more consistent and more focused when they go to an event. The problem with that is some teams just can't do it. Like some teams are running a more thinner margin, so they have to ram the calendar full of tournaments to get more exposure, to give their sponsors kind of the kick that they need, the pop-off that they need, especially for the kind of salaries that some of the players have pushed for. Some players have really pushed for that top dollar amount, so it's a bit unfair to then tell your org, oh, by the way, even though the way you make money is from exposure, I'm going to need you to take less exposure because I need to practice more, even though I asked for the absolute top salary. No, I get why some of those big teams have pushed their squads to go to every big event, especially because you don't know which ones they'll qualify for. Again, if you're the number one team winning everything, qualifying for everything like Astralis is, you can also have more liberties with these matters. It can be a luxury to choose what events you attend when every event invites you and you'd qualify anyway. So not every team's in that position. Some are still on the grind. Some are still on the come up trying to get to all those tournaments. They can't just be turning them down. Then you've got to consider that the reason you already have to be number one for that is because when you lose your top ranking, you lose the invites as well. So you need to already have done well at the events you've been to in the past to allow you to skip them in the future. Some teams aren't in that position. If you're the 9th best team right now and you skip a couple of events, you're going to drop out the top 10. Then you've got to look at the fact that for some teams, it just wouldn't help. If I look at certain teams, two that I would say with some confidence would be like FaZe Clan, Ninjas in Pyjamas. These teams are teams that seem generally at their best when they just go to the tournament and play. And if they get into a hot streak of form, they ride it all out. If they stay at home for weeks and weeks, they don't seem to get much improvement from that. They don't seem like during their breaks, they come out of them the strongest. They seem like they're at their best when they're playing week to week. In fact, the personnel of some of the players is more that mentality. They get hyped, they get excited for the official match, not for the practice weeks. That's when they're going to be more in a lull, chilling out. I also think that whole coaching setup of having Zonic, well, it depends who the fuck you have as your coach, doesn't it? How can you trust to do these things? Do you have someone with as much veteran knowledge as Zonic has, who's watched every version of CSGO and every great team? No, most people don't, and you don't have the trust in that person. So you can't do those things. So while these infrastructure advantages, if you could add them for your team, I'd say give it a go. I wouldn't make them mandated, but I'd try some of them out. Certainly they're admirable. I love the idea that you're doing everything you can, that you're trying to be a disciplined professional. I love the diligence, the idea that you've looked at every single area you could work with, what you could improve, how to optimize it, how to min-max your training practice to get the best results. That's all great stuff. Very, very, again, admirable things that you'd recommend. You should commend Astralis and Refresh for this. I imagine it's very satisfying. Even if you lose a tournament, you know, hey, we did everything we could. We worked out in every possible context. We maximized how efficient our lives were. We tried to make ourselves the most effective team we could be. We did our practice. We did what we wanted to. Did it work? No, we missed a few headshots. We lost the 1v1. We lost the game, but we did everything. The problem is, and this is what the video is all about, is those infrastructure aspects aren't the reason Astralis wins these tournaments. They aren't the reason Astralis wins so many tournaments. They aren't the reason Astralis is the best team in history. They aren't the reason Astralis stay the best team. They are a small percentage difference on a player-by-player basis, and maybe collectively as a team when you add those up, but they're not a big difference. Even if they all added up collectively to be something like 5% of what the total team could do, that still isn't the one thing making them win each tournament. They have to be a very good team in the game to do that. That is what makes them win. Maybe this helps them a little bit be a better team in the game, in which case, cool. Maybe it does add. But if they didn't have that aspect in the game, this wouldn't add up to enough to be the best team, to win the tournaments, to be the most dominant team. Like, would you still win with this Astralis lineup if you took all of this away? Yeah. I don't know that you'd win every tournament. Maybe you'd lose a couple. Maybe you'd lose a third map here or there. Maybe you'd go to a third map here or there and then lose one or two of those. Sure, there's small edges that might change it. Maybe you attended more events, you wouldn't be as dominant as some of the ones you win because of the practice angle. Sure. Maybe in terms of diet and exercise, they'd be a little bit more off in a morning game or a game that goes later at night. Okay, we can add all this in. So there might be a knock-on effect here. And certainly if you tell an org, hey, you'll win an extra map, an extra series, maybe one extra tournament from doing this, they might see it as worth it. The point is that's not what's making Astralis one of the all-time greatest teams. Maybe the best CS or CSGO team to ever play the game. Likewise, if you took all this infrastructure away from Astralis and tomorrow you gave it to NRG and Fnatic, would they beat Astralis? No, probably not. Would they win big Tier 1 events? Probably not. Would they be the best team in the world? I don't think so. Would they be dominant? Almost certainly not. So that alone wouldn't be enough to put them into the top spot. And yet, that's not always the sentiment you get. So the key thing for me, like I said, is it's got to be the right type of team for this to enhance what you're doing already in the game, for this to work well complementary to what you're doing in the game. I think a FaZe type team wouldn't actually enjoy this at all. I think it could make it worse. I think the discipline aspect could drive some players mad. I think some of them, where they're at in their careers, they don't want to have to follow structure. It would take away some of the individual genius of some of the players. Some of them want to have more fun and let off stick. They're just a different type of mentality as people. They're also from different cultures and different backgrounds. I think a team like MIBR, you already saw they didn't want to get up early when Yanko was there. They didn't want to do some of the things that he was suggesting. They were happy just to look at things in the game. That's a valid mentality. There's been a lot of great teams and players have won and had success despite not being the ones who worked as diligently. Same in sports, by the way. Yes, you have the teams like the Spurs and the Patriots and these teams that we all admire and look at, like the discipline and the culture. That's all great, but there's also amazing teams elsewhere, the Lakers, the Warriors, etc., who haven't had to do all those aspects, who don't go as deep on all those things. Look at the Eagles a couple of years ago. Clearly wasn't that type of a team, but they were just as successful or more in specific seasons, specific instances. That alone doesn't add up overall. I think it matters, and I think personally team culture actually matters more than even some of these side aspects in terms of how it sets people's mental framing. But I think it's unreasonable to act like everyone else in CS has to do this or they're not going to catch up with Astralis. Astralis could well fall off with all this infrastructure in place and a team like Na'Vi or FaZe overtake them, or Team Liquid, without any of this stuff changing on either side of the equation. Likewise, a team like North already has most of this infrastructure, yet they've been far and away nothing like Astralis in terms of winning championships, dominance, top tournaments. They've been outperformed by many, many teams that don't do any of this stuff. So you know what? I look forward, quite frankly, in a kind of Schadenfreude fashion, to seeing when Astralis finally falls off and they're losing to some of these teams and they're not winning tournaments, to seeing some of these Astralis and Refresh people just get humbled a little bit and realise ultimately it is the players in the game that win the game. Everything else you do can be great. But in the same way as I would never understand, like, you know, the fucking ball boy of the Chicago Bulls talking shit because the Chicago Bulls won when Michael Jordan was playing for them. It also doesn't really make a lot of sense for the people who are just talking through issues with the player or helping him with his exercise to act like they're the reason their team's winning or they're outperforming someone on Na'Vi. That's not really that reasonable an expectation. So the idea that this is what keeps them on top, no. It might help a bit. I think it probably does with certain players and certain aspects of the team. But what keeps them the number one and makes them win is the players they have. It's the team play they've built, the chemistry that comes from that, the tactical innovations they've been able to put in place, the discipline to learn those tactics. You look elsewhere, if other teams had those factors, they might be beating Astralis already. They might be the number one team. These other aspects of infrastructure, it's nice if you can afford it. If you can put it in place, it might help a bit. It's no guarantee, and it's certainly not the reason Astralis wins. This video was kindly supported by Wendelful, Butt Pounder 420, Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, JDubs, Chi Mao, Daniel Olivar, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks go out to Jerky's Minion, weixz, don't know how to say that's like a Chinese name, and Max Laine. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? It's going to be a big feature in the next few months for me. Well, my Patreon, that's a feature. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you like teasers for my upcoming content? Find out who the next guests are. Maybe you want to take part in that monthly donator discussion with me. Well, if you want any of the above perks, put your money where your mouth is. Support me via the Patreon link below and join the Scrilluminati today.